Hello, welcome to Jazz Is
Jazz's
MasterClass series
at the National Jazz Museum
at the National Jazz Museum in Harlem.
I am Sekou McMillan, the curator of special projects.
My name is Albert Marquez, Zach O'Farrell.
My name is Shirazette Titten.
And we are in conversation with the legendary Bertha Hope. Jazz could only have happened here in America.
The key to everything was the radio.
So this world is too dense. 15 minutes isn't enough to cover it all.
Are you ready? I am.
The truth is, there are no feminine, no masculine instruments, but we might have an idea about which instruments are more feminine, which instruments are perceived as more masculine, right? Or even more considering, and I am definitely speaking in the binary. This is Jazz Is MasterClass series at the National Jazz Museum in Harlem. My name is Asia Burrell Wood, and I am the managing director of the Berkeley Institute of Jazz and Gender Justice, founded at Berkeley College by Terry Lynn Carrington in 2018. I'm also an ethnomusicologist and professor at the college, and today I'm really looking forward to discussing the topic of jazz and gender. Why would we even consider or talk about gender as it relates to jazz or music at all? Why can't we just talk about the music? The thing is, in considering gender, gender is something that is a social construct that absolutely has impacted and shaped our society as long as we know. Within the social construct of gender, as there are others such as race, class, and more, absolutely can be a part of one's identity, how one expresses themselves, and how you identify. Gender concepts, depending on types of language can be gendered, names can be gendered, clothing can be gendered. How this also can impact music. I want everybody who is watching this to think about too the ways that we might even unconsciously even gender instruments, right? So not that this is real, or when I say that this is social construct, it doesn't mean that it's without real consequences, right? So for example, if somebody asked you, what instruments do you perceive of as feminine, right? The truth is, there are no feminine, no masculine instruments, but we might have an idea about which instruments are more feminine, which instruments are perceived as more masculine, right? Or even more considering, and I am definitely speaking in the binary, or historically has been felt to be more appropriate, or people have encouraged or discouraged people into or away from certain instruments, even based on gender. It sounds ridiculous. That's because it is ridiculous, but that doesn't make it less true as far as having impacted and still can impact our society. Sometimes when I've been teaching in my classrooms, I'll ask my students, and they'll often, if I asked what instruments they might perceive of or have learned to perceive as feminine, for example, instruments like violin or flute or harp or what have you come up. When I ask them, okay, well, what about masculine instruments? And they will say the drums, right? Or maybe the bass, certain instruments like that, sometimes the saxophone. But there is an idea, or maybe they have an instrument in mind that doesn't maybe fit either way, but then if it comes to genre, they might start to gender that instrument as well. So for example, the piano, maybe if someone is playing jazz on the piano, they might think of it differently than if they're playing classical music on it, and they might perceive of it differently. Again, this is not true. There are no feminine and no masculine instruments. Instruments are instruments. but there has been perceptions that have been enforced socially, historically, culturally, sometimes even economically over time, right? So now with that thought exercise, if we can think about what instruments are traditionally associated with the genre of jazz. Now, you can play jazz utilizing any instrument that you care to, if that is your goal and that's what your desire is. But when we think about traditional jazz instruments or instruments that would traditionally be in a jazz ensemble, what are we thinking, right? Well, let's start off with the rhythm section. We have the piano, the bass, drums, right? What other types of instruments? Trumpets, saxophones, correct, right? We can go on. So if we go back to, again, just this thought exercise that's only meant for us to consider some of our unconscious thoughts about how we might gender instruments. Again, we're being binary here just for now. And if you think about the instruments that line up for you as feminine or feeling feminine, and the set of instruments that line up for you as that list as feeling masculine, right? And then take that a bit further and think about the traditional or more typical jazz instrumentation or instrumentation that one would find in jazz ensembles or in performances. Those instruments often likely are would be represented in that masculine list. So then what does that mean for who we believe can and should and belong in jazz performance and in what ways? Yes, there has sometimes been this unwritten, even unspoken rule. And again, I'm not the only one who has ever said that. It's been said by many before me. But this perception that women sing and men play. And those are the gender roles or the expected gender roles that show up in jazz historically, right? Or at least the thought. It's actually not the accurate history. But this also does a couple things that are very problematic. One, if the perception is that women sing, right, and there have been and still are, of course, many incredible genius vocalists who are also, by the way, band leaders as well and have been and are. But if we think this, or it has been more perceived as only a role for women or women's work, if you will, then what happens to the valuing of the actual labor, musical labor and artistry that vocalists contribute and do, right? What does it do to the valuing of their musical intelligence and how it's perceived or not perceived, or even the way that genius is conferred or not conferred in those roles, even though they are contributing brilliantly, artistically, as much as any other jazz musician ever has and ever will, as this is an ensemble. It can also erase women who are non-vocal instrumentalists in jazz to render them invisible in history. And even though they were right there the entire time and being major contributors. This has also even impacted music that has gone on, or which music has gone on to be understood as standards and which tunes have not. But I'll get to that later. So, as we continue on with this topic and exploring this topic today, what do we think has happened? Is it that women have not made as many contributions to the art form as men? Or is it that women are interested or have not historically been interested? I'm going to tell you, let's walk through door number 3.